It's getting on into 2020, isn't it? As we come to the last few months of this 4-year sentence that America subjected itself to in the presidency of Donald Trump, the one armchair sociology question many of us have been trying to answer through the past few years is, how can 1/3 of Americans still support him after all that he has done? Now, credit where credit's due, Donald Trump is a master manipulator of the media. You don't have to be a psychic to be able to tell that virtually all of the journalists on CNN, MSNBC, and even half of the people on Fox News despise Trump. And yet, every single one of them are just like a cat with somebody throwing a catnip mouse out in the living room floor. They cannot resist turning every time he says or does something else that is outrageous. I contend that there have been very many reasons why, with proper attention and investigation, that Donald Trump should either be behind bars, if not, in fact, standing in front of a firing squad. But he has been a master of diversion, getting our attention drawn away to the next thing and the next thing, as if we were all school children with serious ADD, but we had run out of Ritalin. I try to go back and look at two different things. The first were indications of character flaws and general ignorance, which should have kept people from voting for Trump in the first place. Like when he carried out a campaign to have the Central Park Five executed, even after DNA evidence had proved their innocence, which was just disgustingly racist and not a little paranoid. And the other being things of a criminal nature for which any president should be impeached and removed from office. Like his recorded admission that he sexually assaulted women and was a sexual predator towards teenagers in a beauty pageant. Folks, I know at least a dozen people who are in a federal prison for 8 to 15 years for much less than what Donald Trump confessed to on the Access Hollywood recording. With a recorded confession, I don't know how that he wasn't charged, tried, and imprisoned in 2016. Maybe it's the money? Yeah, it's the money, right? There are very many reasons why, from a character argument, that no one should have voted for Donald Trump. For the life of me, I don't know how this incident wasn't enough of him making fun of a journalist with a horrible disability. How could anyone have looked at that and said, yeah, there's a president I can be proud of? I don't see how that didn't stop it. So I'm not going to take the time today to speak to all of these character charges that would stem from things like the racism behind the Muslim ban or the pardoning of Sheriff Joe Arpaio, but his firing of James Comey and his refusal to turn over his tax returns as promised should have sparked a real in-depth investigation into his financial ties to Russian banks, or worse, Russian organized crime and the money laundering services he provided, and the credible conviction that Vladimir Putin must have some compromising material on Trump. This is inside the ballpark of treason, for which execution, not just impeachment, is the constitutional punishment. And even the 2-year-long Mueller investigation never even looked under the rock to see what was there. In the end, we have to say that Bob Mueller stalled and ended up protecting Trump from a serious investigation that would have looked at his tax returns and would have interviewed his children and done a much more in-depth investigation of his connections to Russia. As the Senate report on the 2016 election has just come out, and it's like 3 or 4 pages shy of 1,000 pages long, and it clearly states that Trump and his family and aides did collude with Russia to affect the outcome of the 2016 election, and in the 2019 impeachment hearings proved that in spite of the Republican Senate's vote to protect Trump from impeachment, he did collude with, extort, and mob boss style exploit the government of the Ukraine in order to influence the outcome of the 2020 election. He even publicly, on the media, asked for China, a foreign government, to dig up dirt on his competitor in the 2020 race. That doesn't call for an extensive or lengthy investigation. That calls for 30 seconds on Google, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is treason. Treason, treason on the face of it. And there is no rational way around that. But also, the hush money paid to porn star, aka Stormy Daniels, was definitively a campaign finance violation, which is an impeachable offense, and the multiple instances of obstruction of justice related to that payment and the Russia investigation, all of those are impeachable offenses. As much as he says he hates them and that he wants to wall them out, Trump has been found to have knowingly employed illegal immigrants on both construction sites and to maintain his hotels and golf courses. This is a crime that has forced the resignation of many other politicians in the past who were, unfortunately, not nearly as wealthy as Donald Trump. I don't know, is it the money? Is it the money that's protecting him? It's the money. He has removed troops from Syria, basically turning it over to Russia. He has defunded, alienated, and withdrawn forces from NATO, an apparent favor to Russia, moves that are so treasonous that it seems difficult to explain merely because Russia would have a PP tape and charges of mafia money laundering. I don't know what on earth Russia has got by way of compromise on Trump, but it has got to be serious. Trump not only approved of the political murder of an American journalist, Jamal Khashoggi, by the Saudi crown prince, but late last year, reports surfaced that Trump had actually given orders to shoot and kill illegal immigrants as they crossed our southern border. Regardless of who he thinks he can shoot and get away with it, murder, even for a billionaire president, is still illegal. In November of last year, Trump had to pay more than $2 million in fines for having misused and stolen money from the Trump Foundation, which has now been shut down by the courts because of a history of fraudulent and illegal activities. We can only hope that there are some state indictments still being held back, ready to employ as soon as Trump leaves office in January. Now, I'm not even going to create a slide for 2020 because this year, quite frankly, defies being summarized. But you know all too well how badly he has botched the management of the pandemic, how he has used pardons to obstruct justice and fired other patriotic civil servants, also in an attempt to obstruct investigations and justice. And he is now even trampling on the United States Postal Service to try to rig the 2020 election in his favor, all of which are impeachable on either criminal or grounds of just stupid, just dumb. And his available administration friends who could attend a White House cookout this fall has gotten pretty small since his staff advisors are largely in jail, with Steve Bannon now waiting in the wings for his turn behind bars. Now, that's 5 pages and 10 minutes of your life that you can never get back, that I have used to remind you of this one basic fact, that the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, is one of the most horrible, immoral, dishonest, and clearly criminal human beings on earth. For my audience, I probably could have started with that sentence and just moved on. So I apologize for the first 10 minutes here. But the question that I, as a parish pastor, and you, as citizens in a democracy, have to answer is, since this level of creepy immorality, dishonesty, and obvious corruption, and even treason is so plainly obvious, how is it that some polls still show that 40% of our neighbors plan to vote for him? Maybe even 40% of our family members and fellow citizens still approve of and say that they are going to try to re-elect Donald Trump for 4 more years of this embarrassment. Where is the Republican Party? Where are the senators and members of Congress who ran for office with pledges of patriotism as advocates for family values and morality and honesty and the interests of the American people at heart? Where are they? Why do we never hear from a Republican who is running for re-election speak up against the travesty against humanity and, frankly, against Mother Nature itself? How could they possibly go along with this? For all the wrong reasons, I love this Facebook meme that says that the bat that gave the world COVID-19 is now one of the invited speakers at the Republican convention. Obviously a joke. However, reality can sometimes be more shocking than humor. Patricia and Mark McCloskey, who have now been charged with a felony for threatening Black Lives Matter protesters who marched past their multi-million-dollar home in St. Louis, have been invited to speak prior to their eventual conviction and imprisonment. Trump has invited Nick Sandmann, that former Covington Catholic high school student whose interaction with a Native American elder in Washington was captured on video, to the shame of every teenager in America. Nick will speak at the convention. I don't know if he's really going to have Scott Baio back. He had him at the 2016 one, or if Mike from My Pillow ads will be trotted out again, but he's been showing up at a lot of election rallies. And I hope that the demon sperm doctor is just in this picture as a joke. But so far, I think the GOP convention could fairly be labeled Darwin's waiting room. The Republican Party has, by and large, watched in silent consent as Trump has disassembled the alliances that have prevented wars and kept the world safe since World War II. They have silently consented to the dismemberment of our democratic government in the creation of what can only be defined as a fascist form of government. So much so now that the term Antifa, which means anti-fascist, is used as an insult. And he has even suggested that Antifa is a domestic terrorist group. Let me just take a moment to remind you that these young men who fought and died on the beaches of Normandy were anti-fascist. My father, who fought in the South Pacific, suffered more than 20 bouts of malaria and had metal all over his body from having been in multiple explosions. He was fighting as an anti-fascist. Heck, Woody Guthrie, the author of This Land Is My Land, that peace-loving folk singer of the mid-20th century, his guitar had emblazoned on it, "This machine kills fascists." Folks, Woody Guthrie was Antifa. Is he a terrorist? The Republican Party, Republican voters, by and large, Republican donors have by default apparently decided that fascism is in. That's a harsh thing for me to say, and you guys know me. I don't readily say harsh things unless they're true. The resounding question is why? Why? How could this have happened? Last year, Washington Post columnist Michael Gerson asked, "How can you defend a president who is a danger to democracy?" Appropriately, Gerson says, this would be a good issue for in-depth psychological study. No one less than John Dean of Watergate fame and Bob Altmaier, the famous Canadian psychologist who is an expert on authoritarianism, wrote a very powerful response to Gerson's article, observing the fact that this psychological study has in fact already been done over and over in the past century, as we have seen in nation after nation how many people literally prefer a strongman fascist government over democracy. Now, wealthy donors have a different set of motivations. Many of them really do believe that there should be an aristocracy, that they should be the ruling class, and there really ought to be a lot of serfs who work to make them more rich. They can attempt to influence government to create an economic system that they can exploit for personal gain. But the majority of Trump supporters, and forgive me for saying this, but the majority of Hitler supporters are evangelicals who combine a self-congratulatory religion with a deep personal fear that verges on paranoia. These people want a strong leader who will stamp out the dirty people, the inferior people, the criminal element, those who are viewed as takers and not makers. I don't think you've ever heard me compare anyone to Hitler, but folks, Hitler used the Jews, travelers and gays and people with handicapping conditions to blame them for the perceived problems of the mainstream in Germany. And it is not much of a stretch to see that in a very similar way, Trump uses fear and prejudice to blame immigrants, Muslims, and black people for the perceived problems of evangelical Christians in America. It's not original to me, but the observation that America's problem is not that Christianity is not taught in our public schools. Our problem is that Christianity isn't taught in our churches. That's the problem. I said last week that our churches have failed our culture, and this is one of the most crucial aspects of that failure. People make bad decisions when they are scared, when politicians pump up the fear, the way Hitler did and the way Trump does. They create prejudice that is fear-based. Militarism is a byproduct of fear. Hoarding itself, greed, are byproducts of fear. But folks, faith ought to be the antidote to fear. Faith should bolster character, instill values. Even when we're afraid, our faith should demand that we still really want to be good people. I get that Mark and Patricia were scared when they saw hundreds of black people marching down the street in their gated community where no black people live. Awash in white privilege, and frankly, being lawyers, you can see that they were paranoid about those black people coming a little too close to their mansion. But is this armed reaction what good people do? Is this even Episcopalian, for goodness sakes? Don't enjoy that so much. I got work to do up here. In what is increasingly a rare event for me, I took a passage from the New Testament for our wisdom lesson today. And you all know, I'm no fan of St. Paul. He seems to me to be episodically misogynist, sometimes a homophobe. Maybe you can excuse some of that for the time and the culture in which he lived, but neither of those things is laudable at any time or place. And even in this beautiful piece in which he is imploring Christians to be noble people, he still includes a sentence, probably echoing the Old Testament claim that vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, but his suggestion that by doing good to your enemies is like heaping burning coals on their heads, that's not exactly noble. I hate to edit the Bible, but I needed to take that verse out. Still, bearing in mind that Paul has not been to Rome before, and he's writing to people that he does not personally know by and large, he boils down the goal of the Christian journey in this way, telling them to let love be genuine, hate what is evil, hold fast to what is good, love one another with mutual affection, outdo one another in showing honor, do not lag in zeal, be ardent in spirit, rejoice in hope, be patient in suffering, show hospitality to strangers, even bless those who curse you. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep, live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, associate with the lowly. Don't claim to be more wise than you are. Don't repay anyone evil for evil, but take thought for what is noble in the sight of everyone. If it is possible, as long as it depends upon you, live peaceably with all. Hear this. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Folks, I don't think there's any way around the fact that we are now standing on the threshold of the worst part of the coronavirus pandemic. It is going to get a lot worse over the next 2 or 3 months. We may therefore also be standing on the threshold of a new global economic depression. And I feel certain that we are about to enter a time of dramatic changes in governments. We Americans welcome it, but it's going to come either by election or through violence in a number of other countries. Because there is a contest going on in the world now, a contest between fear-driven fascism and the hopefulness of a new kind of democracy and justice. I have spent the last 4 years of my professional life decrying the moral corruption of American politics. And I'll tell you, I'm 64. At my estimable age, I am really looking forward to January of 2021, when I hope to be able to turn the page and start doing what churches are supposed to do, trying to just encourage people to be good people. I'm tired of being mad all the time. I'm tired of letting Donald Trump not just control the media, but by inference controlling the pulpit. I want the gift that the church has to give to the world to not be weighing in constantly on political partisan politics, but to try to offer a spiritual, compassionate worldview. The gift we have to give to the world post-Trump is goodness, character, honesty, generosity, virtue. When Trump either walks out of the White House or is drug out by the Secret Service in handcuffs, the Trump era doesn't end when Trump is either on a golf course in Florida or making license plates in a New York State prison. Guard your hearts, my friends. Not everything that is cathartic is really good for us. But what Trump has revealed to me is that the church has largely failed in its mission to teach people in our society to be good people, how to conquer our fear with faith, how to, as Paul says, overcome evil with good. The Black Lives Matter demonstrators who walked down the street in front of the mansion that is the home of Patricia and Mark McCloskey didn't break down the gate to get into the neighborhood. The gate was unlocked. They just walked in. But when the McCloskeys saw them, what they saw were people who scared them. What good are thousands of churches in our nation if we cannot teach people like the McCloskeys to see the Black Lives Matter demonstrators as their very own brothers and sisters? What if they had become the kind of people that greeted those demonstrators with bottles of cold water, or had been able to come out and throw flowers in the street in support of them? Now, you may say that I'm a dreamer, but I can tell you this: I'm not the only one, and I hope someday you can join me, and the world can truly be as one. Thanks.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.